The courtroom was too bright. Fluorescent light buzzed above Lydia Carson's head as she sat beside her attorney, hands clenched in her lap, nails biting into her own skin. Across the room sat her ex-husband, Daniel Merrick, in a tailored suit and a look of bored contempt, as if he were attending a business meeting instead of fighting over custody of their 10-year-old daughter. Ellie wasn't in the room. That was the cruelest part. Her voice wasn't allowed here, yet her future was being diced into evidence and testimony. Lydia's stomach twisted every time Daniel's lawyer opened his mouth. Phrases like emotional instability, financial insecurity, and inconsistent housing were tossed around like facts. But no one mentioned how Daniel drank too much, how Ellie would call Lydia crying when he locked himself in the garage with a bottle, how Lydia had fought tooth and nail to build a home from scratch after he drained their joint accounts and disappeared with another woman. None of that was admissible today. "She's the mother," Lydia's lawyer argued. "She's been the primary caregiver since the separation. She has a stable job, a safe home, and she moved 3 times in the last year. She pulled Ellie from school mid-semester without notifying my client. That's not stability. That's recklessness." Lydia flinched. The judge raised a hand. "Enough. I've heard what I need to hear." It felt like hours passed before the ruling came. And when it did, it was almost anticlimactic. Sole physical custody awarded to the mother, Lydia Carson. Supervised visitation granted to the father until further review. Lydia didn't cry, not in the courtroom. She stood with grace, nodded politely, and walked out as if the ground weren't shaking beneath her feet. Outside, she collapsed into the arms of her sister, who had waited on the courthouse steps. "You did it," her sister whispered. "No," she said. "Now I start over." That night, she picked up Ellie from her friend's house and drove her home. It was late. The moon was low and fat in the sky, casting pale light through the windows of their small rented townhouse. "Did he yell?" Ellie asked softly from the back seat. "No," she said, forcing a smile through the rearview mirror. "It's over now. It's just us, baby." Ellie nodded, but didn't smile. She stared out the window in silence, chewing on the sleeve of her hoodie. Back home, Lydia made hot chocolate, tucked her daughter into bed, and kissed her on the forehead. "You're safe here, I promise." Ellie didn't answer. She turned to the wall and pulled the blanket over her shoulder. Lydia stood in the doorway longer than she meant to, watching, listening. Ellie had always been a quiet child, imaginative, sweet, sometimes hard to read. But lately, something was different. She startled easily. She had nightmares almost every night. And sometimes Lydia would find her talking to herself in the bathroom mirror, whispering things Lydia couldn't hear through the door. But Lydia told herself it was the divorce, the move, the stress. Kids are resilient, she reminded herself. This will pass. Still, that night, after Ellie had fallen asleep, Lydia sat alone in the kitchen with the court papers in front of her. Victory never felt so hollow. She should have been relieved. She should have felt triumphant. But something was wrong. There was something Ellie wasn't saying. And Lydia, still exhausted from the war she thought was over, had no idea that the real battle hadn't even begun.
The house was small, but it was theirs. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, faded carpet, a crooked kitchen cabinet that slammed shut on its own. But Lydia didn't care. After a year of couch surfing, court hearings, and sleepless nights, this place, with its peeling paint and flickering hallway light, was a kind of sanctuary. And Ellie had her own room again. Lydia decorated it with care. Fairy lights above the bed, soft lavender walls, a bookshelf filled with stories about brave girls and magical forests. She even found a second-hand desk and painted it pale blue, the way Ellie used to like. But her daughter didn't seem to notice. Ellie moved through the new house like a ghost, polite, quiet, and always a step behind. She spoke only when spoken to, ate slowly, slept with the hallway light on, even though she used to insist on total darkness. Lydia watched all of it, tried not to push, but inside her a storm brewed. Something had shifted in Ellie. One afternoon, as they unpacked the last of the boxes, Lydia found an old photo album in the bottom of a crate. She flipped it open, smiling at a picture of Ellie in kindergarten, toothless grin, wild curls, arms around a stuffed bear. She turned the album toward Ellie. "Remember this? You used to take that bear everywhere." Ellie looked at the photo, expressionless. "I don't remember." Lydia's smile faded. "You sure? That trip to the lake?" "I said I don't remember," Ellie snapped, then immediately looked down, guilt spreading across her face like a stain. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Lydia set the album aside. "Hey, it's okay. I didn't mean to upset you." Ellie nodded but didn't meet her eyes. That night, Lydia lay awake in bed staring at the ceiling. The silence of the house wasn't comforting. It was thick, heavy. She could hear every creak in the floorboards, every shift in the wind outside. And she could hear Ellie talking in her room. Not loudly, just a low, steady murmur. Lydia slipped out of bed and crept down the hallway. She paused at Ellie's door, listened. It was a one-sided conversation. "No, I didn't tell her. I don't want to. She'll hate me." Lydia's heart sank. She knocked gently. "Ellie?" The voice stopped. A pause. Then the rustle of sheets. "Yeah? Everything okay?" "Just talking to my stuffed animals." "Okay, sleep tight." She returned to her room, but sleep never came. 2 days later, while cleaning Ellie's room, Lydia found a notebook under the bed, spiral-bound with a cracked purple cover. She hesitated, then opened it. Most of it was doodles, scribbled stars, drawings of girls with wings. But tucked between 2 pages was something different. A note, written in Ellie's uneven handwriting. "I didn't tell Mom about the closet. I can't. She'll send me back." Lydia sat down, breath stolen from her chest. What closet? What was Ellie hiding? Later that evening, she tried to bring it up gently, over dinner between bites of overcooked pasta. "Hey, sweetie, do you remember that apartment you lived in with Dad? Did anything ever happen there that scared you?" Ellie froze. Her fork hovered midair. Then she smiled, too quickly, too carefully. "Nope, everything was fine." Lydia's stomach twisted. That night, she searched the rest of the notebook. Nothing else was clear, just fragments, phrases. "It comes when I'm alone. I didn't mean to lie. He said if I told, it would get worse." Lydia felt like she was drowning in her own child's silence. She wasn't just fighting for Ellie's safety anymore. She was fighting to understand who or what had already gotten to her, and she was terrified of what she might find.
Lydia couldn't stop rereading the note. "I didn't tell Mom about the closet. I can't. She'll send me back." It sat in her purse for 2 days, folded and creased, like a secret too heavy to hold, yet impossible to let go. She tried to focus on work, on errands, on anything else, but her mind kept returning to one question. What happened in that closet? She began observing Ellie Newer closely. Every movement, every word, every pause between her sentences. Her daughter, once animated and curious, now seemed like she was walking on glass no one else could see. She flinched when someone knocked too hard on the door. She avoided eye contact with men in public. She slept with all her closet doors open, even the one in the hallway. And she never talked about the time she lived with her father. Lydia sat on the edge of her own bed one night, phone in hand, debating whether to call Daniel, the man she once loved, the man she now barely recognized. But the idea of confronting him without proof felt like walking into fire with a matchstick. So she turned instead to someone who might know more. Daniel's sister, Andrea. They hadn't spoken in nearly a year. Lydia had cut ties with most of Daniel's family during the divorce, unsure who had taken his side, or worse, who had known the truth and stayed silent. Still, she sent the message. "Hey, it's Lydia. I know this is unexpected, but can I ask you something about Ellie, in confidence?" The reply came an hour later. "Of course. What's going on?" They agreed to meet the next day at a quiet cafe on the edge of town. Lydia arrived early, jittery and sleep-deprived. Andrea arrived 10 minutes late, wearing dark sunglasses and a scarf, like someone trying not to be seen. "I was surprised you reached out," Andrea said, sitting down. "Daniel said you wanted to cut us all off." "I did," Lydia admitted. "But this isn't about us. It's about Ellie." Andrea leaned forward slightly, sensing the weight in Lydia's voice. "She's been different since she came back. Withdrawn, anxious. She wrote something in a notebook about a closet. Said she was scared I'd send her back if she told me what happened." Andrea's face turned pale. She looked down at her hands. "I was afraid of this." Lydia's pulse spiked. "What do you know?" Andrea hesitated. "Daniel, he wasn't always himself. After the divorce started, he got darker, angrier. He'd call me late at night, rambling, drunk, said Ellie was ungrateful, that she needed to be taught discipline. He never said exactly what he meant, but..." She stopped. Her voice cracked. "But I heard things on the phone. Her crying, him yelling." Lydia's hands trembled under the table. "Why didn't you tell me?" she whispered. "I was scared," Andrea said. "He's my brother, but he can be terrifying. I didn't know if it was my place. I thought if I said something, he'd cut me out, and I didn't know how bad it really was." Lydia fought the urge to scream, to throw her coffee at the wall. Instead, she breathed, swallowed the burn in her throat. "I think he hurt her," she asked. Andrea was silent for a long moment. Then finally, "I think he scared her. Maybe worse. And I think Ellie didn't know how to say it." Lydia stood. "I need to protect her, even if that means digging into things I don't want to see." Andrea nodded, eyes glistening. "If you find something, I'll back you up. I'll tell what I know." That night, Lydia returned home and found Ellie sleeping on the couch, curled up under a blanket, the TV still on. A cartoon character laughed in the background, too loud for the hour. Lydia sat beside her, brushing the hair from her forehead. "I'm going to find the truth, even if it breaks me."
It was a Sunday morning when he showed up. Lydia was folding laundry in the living room, sunlight cutting sharp across the hardwood floor, when the knock came, slow, deliberate, like someone testing the door for weakness. Ellie was upstairs, humming to herself in her room, finally having a rare moment of peace. Lydia didn't expect anyone. When she opened the door, she froze. It was Graham. her ex-husband's cousin, quiet, strange, and always lingering too long in the corners of family events. He had lived with Daniel for a few months after the divorce, supposedly to help with the bills. Lydia had never trusted him, but Daniel insisted he was harmless. "He's just weird," he'd said, "socially off, nothing to worry about." But here he was, standing on her porch, wearing an oversized jacket and holding something in his hand, a small plastic container like leftovers. "Hi, Lydia," he said. She didn't move. "What are you doing here?" He blinked as if the question surprised him. "I brought Ellie her favorite cookies, chocolate chip with no nuts. She used to ask me to bake them." Lydia's throat tightened. "We haven't seen you in almost a year." "I know, but I thought maybe she missed me. She always liked when I told her stories." Lydia stepped forward, blocking the doorway. "You need to leave." Graham frowned. "I didn't mean to upset you. I just wanted to say hi." "Graham, you need to go. Right now." His eyes shifted, not angry, but strange, detached. "She used to talk to me more than anyone else. You know that?" Lydia's heart pounded. "Goodbye." She shut the door and locked it. Then she ran upstairs. Ellie was on the floor of her room, coloring quietly. She looked up when Lydia entered, her eyes wide. Lydia sat beside her, trying to steady her breathing. "Ellie, did Graham ever come to Dad's house when you lived there?" Ellie stopped coloring. Her hand froze. Then she nodded. "Did he ever do anything that made you uncomfortable?" A long silence. Lydia watched her daughter's chest rise and fall. Then Ellie whispered, "He said not to tell." Lydia felt her stomach drop. "What did he say, baby?" Ellie's eyes filled with tears. "He said I'd go to jail, that I did something bad, that you wouldn't love me anymore." Lydia wrapped her arms around her daughter, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. "That's not true. None of that is true. You didn't do anything wrong, you hear me?" Ellie sobbed against her. "He said the closet was our secret, that it was a game, but I hated it. I hated it." Lydia couldn't speak. She could barely think. She held Ellie for what felt like hours, rocking her as if that motion alone could undo what had been done. That night, after Ellie was asleep, Lydia sat at the kitchen table with her phone. Her fingers hovered over the screen. First, she called Andrea. "I need you," she said. "Now." Andrea arrived 20 minutes later. Lydia told her everything. Andrea's face went pale. "Graham? Jesus. I knew he was strange, but he was at the house today, with cookies, acting like everything was normal. You have to go to the police." Lydia nodded, but her voice trembled. "I'm scared they'll say it's hearsay, that there's no evidence, that I'm just trying to punish Daniel through Graham." Andrea reached across the table. "I'll go with you. I'll say what I know. He used to be alone with her all the time, and Daniel never supervised anything." Lydia stared down at the note still tucked in her purse, the one that started it all. She finally understood what Ellie meant. "I didn't tell Mom about the closet." It wasn't just about fear. It was about shame. The kind no child should ever carry. And now, Lydia had no choice. She would protect her daughter, even if it meant burning the world down to do it.
The police station was colder than Lydia expected. The walls were sterile, the chairs uncomfortable. The fluorescent lights made everything feel more clinical, more distant, as if what she was about to say could be cleaned off afterward, wiped down like it had never happened. Andrea sat beside her, silent, hands folded tightly in her lap. The officer who took their statement was kind, but cautious. He listened as Lydia described Graham's visit, the cookies, the notebook, the whispers Ellie had shared. But when it came time to document the abuse, everything shifted. "Did your daughter say he touched her?" "Not in those exact words," Lydia admitted. "She said it was a game, that he made her keep it secret, that it happened in a closet. She said she hated it." The officer nodded, scribbled notes. "And you have the notebook?" "Yes." He paused. "We'll have to involve a forensic interviewer, someone trained to talk to children. But if she's only made vague statements, it may be difficult to pursue without more details." Lydia felt like the ground dropped from beneath her. "You mean it might not be enough?" "Legally, not yet. But it's a start." "A start? What did that even mean? When her daughter was walking around with trauma stitched beneath her skin?" They left the station without answers. That night, Lydia sat on the floor of Ellie's room while her daughter lay in bed, fingers clutched around a small stuffed owl, the same one she used to carry during visits to her father's. "Sweetheart, can I ask you something? You don't have to answer. I just want to understand." Ellie nodded, eyes distant. "When you said Graham had a game, what did he do?" Ellie went quiet. Her lips trembled, her body curled inward. "He would take me in the closet, close the door. He said we were playing spies, that no one could hear us or the mission would fail." Lydia's breath caught in her throat. "He said I had to sit very still, that I couldn't talk, and then he'd touch my legs, my back. Once he made me take off my shirt, just for a second." Ellie's voice cracked. "I hated it, but he said I would go to jail, that I let it happen, that I was bad." Lydia pressed a hand over her mouth to keep from sobbing. "You're not bad," she whispered. "None of it was your fault. Do you understand me, Ellie? Not a single piece of it." Ellie nodded. Tears rolled down her cheeks. Lydia held her for hours, and when Ellie finally drifted off to sleep, her face softer than it had been in weeks, Lydia knew what she had to do. The next morning, she called the investigator back. "I want the interview scheduled as soon as possible. I'll bring the notebook, I'll bring her drawings, I'll bring whatever it takes." A few days later, Ellie met with a forensic interviewer at a child advocacy center. The room was warm and filled with toys, but Lydia could only watch from a monitor in another room. The interviewer was calm, patient, asking questions like a gentle conversation. And Ellie spoke, more than Lydia expected. She spoke of Graham, of the closet, of how he told her it was their game, that he would whisper stories in her ear and touch her under her clothes when no one was home. How her dad never came to check on her. How once she tried to hide under the bed, but Graham found her. Lydia's hand trembled as she watched. Rage and heartbreak intertwined like a noose around her throat. When the interview ended, the case shifted immediately. The detective who had seemed cautious days ago was now intense, focused. They requested to search Daniel's old apartment. They brought in Graham for questioning. And Lydia was finally allowed to breathe, just slightly. But the relief was temporary, because now came the question of what to do with the rest of the truth. Daniel hadn't touched Ellie. That much was clear. But he had left her alone, vulnerable, with a man who should never have been near a child. He had ignored her cries, trusted Graham more than his own daughter. That neglect cost Ellie her safety, and maybe more. The prosecutor asked if Lydia wanted to press for full termination of Daniel's parental rights. No visitation, no legal standing. It would sever him completely. Lydia sat in silence for a long time after the meeting. She thought of Ellie, of how she now slept through the night, of how she started drawing again, of how her voice carried more strength than it had in months. And she thought of Daniel, not with hate, but with brutal clarity. He had chosen convenience over protection, silence over responsibility. Lydia knew her answer. She would not let Ellie near that man again. Not now, not ever.
The hearing was short. No jury, no fanfare, just a judge, two attorneys, and Lydia sitting in a stiff wooden chair with a single sheet of paper in her hands. A sworn affidavit requesting the termination of Daniel Merrick's parental rights. She had rehearsed this moment in her mind dozens of times. Sometimes she imagined screaming at Daniel across the courtroom. Other times, she pictured him breaking down, begging for forgiveness he didn't deserve. But in reality, he didn't even show up. He had waived the hearing. His lawyer submitted a statement. Daniel was leaving the state, starting over. He didn't contest the petition. He didn't want to, quote, cause further disruption in his daughter's life, end quote. Lydia sat in silence as the judge read the papers, flipped through the evidence, and then spoke the words that would change everything. Parental rights terminated. The court finds this action to be in the best interest of the child. It was done. No more visitation, no more phone calls, no more legal tether to the man who had failed to protect Ellie from a monster. Lydia walked out of the courthouse feeling hollow and full at the same time. A strange duality. She had won, but it didn't feel like winning. It felt like survival, like coming up for air after being held underwater for too long. At home, Ellie was waiting on the porch, curled up with her owl plushie and a book in her lap. Lydia knelt in front of her. "It's over," she said softly. Ellie looked at her, uncertainty flickering behind her eyes. "Are you sure?" I nodded. "No one can take you away. He doesn't get to be part of our lives anymore. You're safe." For a moment, Ellie didn't respond. Then slowly, she leaned forward and wrapped her arms around her mother's neck. "Thank you," she whispered. She held her tightly, and in that embrace was a weight lifting. Not just for Ellie, but for herself too. The guilt, the fear, the constant wondering if she was doing enough. It didn't vanish, but it shifted. It became manageable. That night, they painted Ellie's closet door. Not to cover it up, but to reclaim it. Lydia let her choose the colors. Soft pink, pale blue, and gold stars scattered across the surface like constellations. They turned it into a galaxy, a portal, not to fear, but to imagination. "This closet belongs to you, no one else." Ellie smiled, truly smiled, and nodded. In the weeks that followed, things changed. Ellie started asking questions. She asked what therapy was. She asked why bad people sometimes seem nice. She asked if it was okay to still miss her dad sometimes, even after everything. Lydia answered all of it, with honesty, with patience, with love. Because silence had nearly destroyed them, and now it was time to let truth be their language. One evening, as Lydia tucked Ellie into bed, her daughter reached for her hand. "Do you think I'm still broken?" she asked. Her heart cracked, but she didn't flinch. "No," she said. "I think you were hurt, and now you're healing, and that's the bravest thing anyone can do." Ellie nodded, her eyes drifting closed. Outside, the wind moved gently through the trees. The house was quiet, not tense, not fearful, just peaceful, safe. And somewhere deep in her chest, she felt something return, something she hadn't felt in a long, long time. Hope.
Ethan's journey is a portrait of fractured families, hidden truths, and the quiet strength it takes to confront the past. In the shadow of loss, he found not just betrayal, but the chance to redefine what family means. Not by blood alone, but by choice, pain, and forgiveness. This story reminds us that secrets, no matter how deeply buried, have a way of surfacing. And when they do, we're faced with a choice: to fracture further or to rebuild with what remains. Forgiveness is not forgetting. It is the courage to accept imperfection in others and in ourselves, and to find peace beyond the silence.